What would happen if I took a chance? It's always hard at first glance. I don't wanna, but I know I gotta do it. The truth is hard to swallow. I think I'll chew it.
A few years ago, I started writing a fictitious story based on my time as an educator. It is called Taught, and the story was partially inspired out of anger and frustration fueled by burnout. Okay, actually, it was more than partially inspired by anger and frustration. But Taught has also become a vehicle for me to tell what I thought at the time, and in some ways continue to think, was and is the real story of teaching. I now realize that my perspective is not everyone's perspective, but there are some pieces of Taught that resonated with many educators. This podcast is an extension of that story, and I, a former teacher, will interview other educators asking them to share how they really feel about the current state of education. Why are so many teachers burn out? Why are so many, like me, leaving the field? We likely won't solve any problems or come up with any solutions, but we can create a community of voices that maybe begin the conversation around how educators can take back teaching. I'm Melissa LaFour. Welcome to Taught, the podcast.
I like to be educated, but I'm so frustrated.
Hey everyone! Today we're changing things up a bit again, but this time it's for a very personal reason. But I promise it does relate to educator burnout, kind of in a roundabout way. But I think the information's really important for all of our educators, and I do think it does relate to burnout. I'm going to share a deeply personal story with you that impacted my time as an educator, my opinions and philosophies on special education and the U.S. healthcare system, and most importantly, my oldest daughter's experience in the public and private education systems. And I'll probably talk mostly about that. So, when my oldest daughter, Tristan, was about 8 years old, she began doing what our family, and I'm embarrassed to even admit that we called it this, we called it the head thing. When she was outside or in the car, she would turn her face toward the sun, roll her eyes, flutter her eyelids, and then sweep her right hand across her forehead. Around the same time, we had cut her hair, and for the first time ever, she had bangs. And I erroneously connected the bangs with the swiping the forehead, like you're swiping your hair off your forehead. Um, kind of the sweeping the phantom hair. And as I am recounting this, I actually wonder if maybe she started this behavior before we cut her hair. I mean, it could have been. Maybe we cut your hair, Tristan, because you had actually started. I mean, I don't know now. And we won't know. But again, erroneously, I thought this was a habit that had developed from hair falling in her face and then or trying to move that hair. So, as she progressed through her third grade year of school, the behavior went from once in a while to daily, and it was really noticeable. It was impacting a lot of things in her life at that point. So, we invested in sunglasses and hats, and we had these little toy prosthetics that would fit over the ends of her fingers, just to kind of first of all, the sunglasses and the hats were to shield her from the bright light of the sun specifically. But the prosthetics were just to maybe give her that extra reminder that she was, doing the sweeping. So nothing seemed to be super effective. And then during her fourth grade year, her teacher contacted me, and I'll never forget it. She wanted me to come in and meet with her as soon as possible, which I did. And she told me that Tristan had been doing the head thing at recess, and she was so caught up in it that she was unresponsive when the teacher called to her numerous times, and the teacher went over and was right there and was trying to get some sort of response or get her attention. And Tristan actually, she wet herself. And eventually she came out of it and the teacher was able to get her attention. But I was shocked. It had never been that severe. So we had thought this was a little habit and it would eventually get better, but it seemed to be getting worse. And her teacher, Mrs. Smith at Southport Christian School in Southport, North Carolina. Mrs. Smith, I don't know if you're still out there, but we've never forgotten you. And we're so appreciative of your intervention. Mrs. Smith knew a psychiatrist who specialized in evaluating children and gave me his information. So we scheduled an appointment immediately, and Tristan had a pretty extensive and expensive evaluation done. And the evaluation, according to him, showed that she had ADD with no hyperactivity, generalized anxiety disorder, and that she showed signs of Tourette's syndrome. So unfortunately, it was just we had already planned this move. It just worked out that we moved like 6 months after this. We moved from North Carolina to Texas. And actually, the next couple of years I felt were pretty good. In fourth grade and fifth grade, the rest of her fourth grade year and fifth grade year, the teachers were very open to working with whatever we needed. If she felt like she needed to wear sunglasses or a hat in the classroom, it was not a big deal. She had friends. The teachers were really good about not letting kids be mean and rude and accepting of her. And her teachers kind of took her under their wing. So those were very good experiences. And then we moved again. And hindsight is always 2020. And I would like to have done things differently if I could go back, but we can't. And the reality is that for the next up until graduation, I pretty much started fighting the school system. Ironically, which is this was the district that I started my teaching career in. And yeah, I taught there for 8 years, but I probably fought with half the people I worked with before I was ever a teacher. And then the other half I fought with after I was, no, I'm joking. But yeah, those academic years from 6th to 12th grade were tough. And I had to fight for a 504 because I actually said that we called it a tick at that point because we thought you had Tourette syndrome. But it was not getting better. It was, it didn't completely interfere with her life, but it certainly didn't make life easier either. And I knew that we needed some kind of education intervention because she had been very successful in fifth grade. And here we were in sixth grade. She was failing classes. It was stressful for her. And I mean, we went through this every year after that. Teachers were very frustrated and authoritarian, and she didn't really have those bonds. She had multiple teachers, multiple things to kind of keep going. And we worked on organization systems, but I realized we needed some help. So I tried to have her evaluated to see if she qualified for special education. And so I want anyone, I know teachers mainly listen to my podcast, but if you're not a teacher and you don't know how this system works, essentially, when you have a student tested to see if they qualify for special education services, there has to be some sort of discrepancy. For example, there must be some cognitive impairment that creates some kind of discrepancy. An example would be a student can read and write and they don't have any issues in that area, but when we test them in mathematics, those scores are really, really low. So they're looking for those kinds of, and it's an abundance of tests, but there has to be some sort of something that shows up. And nothing showed up for her because she was of normal intelligence. I would say now she probably thinks she's above normal, and she might be, but she she did not qualify. She didn't have any discrepancies. And so the other alternative is an other health impaired IEP, which means the student has difficulties in the school setting because of a health condition. And I'm just going to say, for the syndrome that we're going to talk about today, I believe that it probably would qualify someone for an OHI IEP. And if you need an advocate, reach out, because I really think it meets the criteria. But what was left to us, and as we're beginning to investigate the thing that we're going to talk about today, I'm seeing that a lot of families actually go this route. It's called a 504. And a 504 is a document that says, hey, this kiddo has something that is, we have a diagnosis of something, we have a label. And if the kid has this label that a professional has given them, we can sit down and talk about what accommodations that kiddo can get, which this seemed like a great pathway for us because that's what she needed. She needed accommodations. She needed to be able to wear sunglasses inside sometimes. She needed to be able to wear a hat. She needed to be excused from outdoor or PE activities or whatever, or bus trips. She needed to be able to wear a hat and glasses or whatever. So, yeah, I had to fight to get this document, and we did not get it accomplished until she was a freshman in high school. And I do want to say she did have one good school year, and that was her 8th grade year. And because her 8th grade year was so good, we used a lot of what those teachers did to later make the list of accommodations for her 504. So she didn't qualify for SPED services because they believed she could learn at the average pace, except she did qualify. And we didn't know that at the time, but she did. Tristan knew something was not right and that it was affecting her learning. And then at the end of her sophomore year in high school, Tristan had her first tonic-clonic grand mal seizure. These are the ones that you see on TV, the scary ones. And 2 weeks later, she had her second tonic-clonic seizure. And finally, we had something concrete to make the education system actually work a little harder to help us help her succeed. However, at that point, Tristan was not a fan of school, and she was a full on rebellious teenager. And, the fact that she was now the girl with epilepsy in high school didn't make her like, here I am, life is good, right? It was great. Now I've got one more thing to contend with. But our story doesn't stop here because now we knew she had epilepsy, and it was kind of like, okay, see, we've been telling you something's been going on, school system. Um, and I do want to say Tristan's lived a fairly normal, independent life with her epilepsy. It has not been a cakewalk for her, but she's been able to, I mean, you have a job, you live on your own. She has a partner, she has a cat, which will probably make an appearance before long. She currently works for a co-op special education office, ironically. Tristan, what is your title? I have administrative assistant.
Um, it's a management information systems clerk, so no one really knows what that is, but I help manage the IEP database and manage student records, and I'm sort of the in between from the teachers writing the IEP information, and then I kind of clean that up as best I can, and then report that to the state, to the Department of Education. So I'm the in between.
It's kind of funny that she's now working in this area. um, but despite being on medication for the seizures, and side note, she did start taking Lamictal for her seizures, the grand mals, when she was 15. The head thing went away. She didn't that kind of, and we're pretty sure the Lamictal had a profound effect on that. But she still fluttered and rolled her eyes at times, but not as much as before. But she still needed accommodations. To this day, she still needs accommodations, and they are hard to come by. She has to articulate and explain things that most of us don't understand even after she explains it, because epilepsy is electrical activity in the brain. And if I ask anyone to explain what their electrical activity in their brain feels like, nobody can answer that. I don't know anyone other than people who have seizure activity that can explain what that feels like. And it's different for every type of seizure and every person that has it. So it has been like school all over again for her in the workforce. And there is my grand cat. If you can't prove to others or make them understand, then the problem doesn't exist. So no accommodations for you. Except this problem does exist, and not just for her. We just didn't know what to call it. So a few weeks ago, Tristan sent me a text, and I still have it. It says, I think I have Javon syndrome. It would explain so much. Okay, so I am Mama Bear, and I immediately go to clevelandclinic.org webpage for this to see what Javon syndrome is. And it's a rare type of epilepsy where people actually have a specific kind of seizure that makes the eyes flutter. And the eye fluttering is seizure activity that cannot be controlled without medication. So, yes, this is it. I thought, she figured it out. But as I was reading down, she was missing some of the other characteristics. And the biggest one is that most people who have Javon's don't have tonic-clonic seizures. And Tristan, you just had one like 5 or 6 weeks ago, right? And we've lost count of the number she's had. Hers are mainly controlled by medication. We're very fortunate in that area, and we know it. But she's had a few tonic-clonics. And at the very end of this article, there was a section titled, How Does Sunflower Syndrome Relate to Javon's Syndrome? Spoiler, it doesn't. It's an even rarer genetic seizure disorder. And I believe this is what Tristan has. So she does not have an official diagnosis, but she follows the pattern to a T. So Tristan will be 34 in October, and it has taken us 26 years to figure out what's going on. So today on my podcast, I have my daughter here as a guest. And we're going to bring awareness to a condition that, despite seeing countless neurologists and her having the classic symptoms, we found out about through TikTok and a series of fortuitous coincidences. And, how does this relate to teacher burnout? Well, guess what? Most people who begin to show symptoms of this are school age when they do it. So, teachers, it's a double whammy here. We want you to know about this syndrome in case you ever have a student that shows the symptoms. Maybe you can help a family. But we're also going to talk a little bit about how we make accommodations in the classroom and how that does not have to contribute to burnout. Tristan, thank you for agreeing to do this with me, and welcome.
Well, of course. I'm honored to be here. Thank you, Mom. um,
I want to
this is
start
one
our
of those.
conversation with, how does it feel? Let's start over. I want to start our conversation with, how does it feel to have a label for this? We don't have a diagnosis yet, but we do have something to call what you have now other than just epilepsy. How does that feel?
Well, it feels pretty great. I will say that I am going to see a new neurologist at an epilepsy center in September to hopefully get this this official diagnosis. I have had to kind of fight my current neurologist about this, and I have asked for an EEG. I've told him it only happens. It really only happens in sunlight or when I'm super stressed. Um, or, I told him I turn to a bright light and my eyes flutter. I don't do the head thing anymore because of the lamictal, but for anyone who's benefiting from the video, I can show you what it looked like. I just took my right hand and I was just doing this. And I would stay awake through it for the most part, but sometimes I would do it back to back, like that. And then that's when if I did that too much, then that's when it caused issues. And I still have issues when I go out into the sunlight. I don't do the hand waving anymore, but I still feel like a phantom feeling, a phantom urge, and I flutter my eyes so much in the sun. And I do turn my head to whatever light source, usually the sun, but it can be any bright light. Um, but I'm hoping, right now I feel really good because I feel it's been such a like my whole life, basically, just years and years of having no answers. And finally, we stumbled upon this, and if I can just get a doctor to listen to me, which is kind of the hard part, then hopefully we can get this accurate, like set in stone diagnosis. And I think part of the problem in the past is that neurologists, they kind of go by a process, right? So if they think, well, maybe this person has some unusual electric activity in their brain, they'll start with an EEG. And for me, since I was having the grand mal tonic-clonic flop on the floor like a fish seizures, then they did the flashing lights, because that usually triggers them. And because, yes, bright lights, flashing lights do trigger those seizures, they were able to catch that. But I was indoors when we did that. It was just a couple years ago where I asked, I told a different neurologist, actually at an epilepsy center as well. I told her about these same symptoms. It happens in the light. I told her all of these things that are happening with me. And so she had somebody actually come out to my apartment to do an EEG, and I told her that it was bright light, and she had it set up so that there was no light simulation at all, no flashing lights. I was in the shade. They turned the lights off in my apartment, and I just sat there with all these things on my head and for an hour, and I actually fell asleep. I started taking a nap. So of course they didn't catch it, because it wasn't outside. So then I asked my current neurologist if I could have an ambulatory EEG, which is an EEG that you usually do at home. It's usually 24 hours to, I think, up to 72 hours. And then usually you have this EEG, you have this device hooked up, and as you're going about your day, if something happens, you push a button to document it. And then they can go to that point and see if there's seizure activity. Like if I go outside, I'm going to say, yes, I'm fluttering my eyes, click it at this point. But my current neurologist, who I think might just be frustrated with me at this point, trying to pass me off, but who knows. But he said that he wasn't familiar enough with epilepsy to be able to read an EEG like that. Even though I've only been treated for epilepsy this whole time, but I do appreciate the referral to the epilepsy center. So hopefully in September, I'm going to be getting an official diagnosis, and I'm super excited about that.
I'm excited about it too. And you've kind of mentioned a few of the symptoms that go. So the syndrome is called sunflower syndrome, and it's not called the head thing. It's called waving. We have learned.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about sunflower syndrome?
Yeah. So, yeah, the reason it's called sunflower syndrome is because that's very stereotypical. It's very characteristic of sunflower syndrome to turn towards the light source. I found myself doing this even when I'm indoors. If there's sunlight coming through a window, I could be having a conversation and I just feel compelled to turn towards the light. I mean, I always thought that was, just a weird quirk, but that is one of the characteristics. So you turn to the light and and you wave your hand, and it's only one hand, and you wave it in front of your face. Now, for me, it's my right hand, and I actually, um, whenever I would do it as a kid, um, I'm actually brushing above my eyebrow, and I would get little raw spots, which I found out since then that that's very common with people. Sometimes it's their left or right hand or whatever, but most people do touch above their eyebrow, and they do like they were like the people that I have met um, who have this, then it's so crazy because I thought I was the only one who did this for the longest time, and to hear someone else say, "Yeah, I get raw spots on my forehead too." That's such a weird thing to be able to connect to someone with, but yeah, but it's very um, it's a very stereotypical or stereotyped seizure in that way. So those are the components: turning towards the light and waving your hand. And for me, I flutter my eyes as well. Um, some people will say it's a self-induced seizure, but it's not. The hand waving is part of the actual seizure itself. So it's not, triggering because they thought it was triggering like a strobe effect, but it's actually part of the seizure behavior itself.
Yeah.
It usually starts within the first decade of life. It usually begins with periods of turning towards the light before the hand waving starts. Um, so it could be a couple years of turning towards the light before the hand waving part actually starts. But yeah, usually I think it was between like ages like 7 to 10 is usually when the whole thing starts, and I was about 8, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And
So
I read 6 to 10 in another one too. So,
okay.
but it is that early childhood. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was enough for me. But then I also read another portion of this is that eventually people who have it usually have their first tonic-clonic seizure between 14 and 18 or something like that. And you were 15.
Usually, yeah, usually it's usually around the time, like, shortly after puberty starts, um, which that was the time for me. So fun stuff.
Yeah. So as we were reading it and we were realizing that you were textbook, I just want to say from a parent's point of view, I also had that feeling of we have something to call this. And the
Mm-hmm.
final thing that I think is important to mention is that it's genetic. So this is not, and it's very rare. Right now, there are approximately 1,300 people in the world diagnosed with this. However, I really wonder if it's not far more than that because of our own experience. And I actually just
Mm-hmm.
spoke with our new friend Emmy today, and Emmy has a very similar, story to Tristan's that she developed along the same path. And she wasn't diagnosed until she was 17. So she didn't know that she had sunflower syndrome. Nobody had talked to her about sunflower syndrome until she was 17 years old. So that makes it challenging for me to believe that there are only 1,300 people in the world with this when I know how hard it is to have everybody thinks it's something that you can control. Emmy actually talked about how she had a pediatrician who made her wear a cast on her arm for a period of time, saying this would be the thing that got her to stop the waving. And like you said, the waving it's part of the seizure. So there's nothing that's going to stop it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was I know it was initially diagnosed as a tic, but I remember thinking growing up, I mean, I had seen other kids that had a tic, but I had never seen anyone else who had a tic that made them like start to, if they did it enough in only in the sunlight, that it would start to make me have this sleepy feeling, and I would start to like lose awareness of my surroundings, um, which is what was happening with that day in recess with Mrs. Smith. And I think I didn't, so I was like 8, and I didn't have tonic clonic seizures at that point, but I definitely think that I looking back, that is the type of behavior, that same type of feeling, that falling asleep feeling that I get before I have a tonic clonic seizure. So now I can look back and say, if I had done that long enough and she hadn't been able to pull me out of it, I very well could have been about to go into one. So, I mean, yeah, it's easy. You're right. It's easy to look back and hindsight is 2020. But yeah.
Yeah. And we go back and forth, right? Because we've talked about this. On one hand, it's like, oh, if we had known, we could have done da 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 da. But on the other
Mhm.
hand, and actually, I'm in a Facebook support group, and somebody actually alluded to this, Lucy. Lucy was like, she believes that she had sunflower syndrome and she's older than you are. And she said, we just back in the day, man, the 80s and 90s, we powered through. Nobody stopped to think about it. She said, I had epilepsy. Everybody knew that. And I had to make adjustments around that, but it wasn't really something that I gave a lot of thought about. Um, like I said, so I think that maybe it wouldn't have made any difference if we had known. However, I do think that it was disheartening to me um whenever I heard Emmy's story, because Emmy's about 10 years younger than you are. And Emmy had a very similar educational experience. And as a mother and an educator, I want to say to everyone, rarely do any two people have the exact same experience when it comes to how we navigate life and our own learning. So let's just think about that. I don't care what they're calling it right now. I think right now it's universal design for learning. The bottom line is not to teach every kid to their best learning style. I know that's what we think it is. We have to find out what their learning style is and we have to teach to that. That Our job is to figure that out for ourselves as we develop. I mean, I believe this. I believe that it's my job to figure out, oh, if I take notes, I'm going to remember this better. Or I need to read something twice in order to remember it. That's for me to, not for somebody to say, here's all these ways that you can get this, which one works best for you. And then I choose like a menu. Um, but I feel like educators, their job is to listen when we tell them things. And I'm not talking about the little things like, Susie doesn't like the way that Sally smells. Can you have their desks 3 feet apart? That's not the kind of stuff I'm talking about. I'm talking about when a kid says, I feel like I'm going to go to sleep and then I can't remember anything, that we need to be like, "Ooh, okay, that's,
You're fine.
yeah." And Mrs. Smith was on it, right? She's like,
Mhm.
you're not responding when I'm talking to you. And she took
Mhm.
it seriously. Um, you know, there were many other things. It was the fact that you can't remember things. And now we know if you're having multiple seizures every day, probably wasn't ADD. It was probably that you were going in and out, it's a little hard to focus, a little hard to focus. So I
Yeah.
have three children. You are my oldest of the three, and only one of you needed something different in the school system. And because you didn't have a diagnosis that fit the system, we could not get you what you needed to be successful. And I find that challenging. And I hope that I think that educators find this challenging, that oftentimes we're the ones saying, okay, this girl's, zoning out and I can't get her attention. I need somebody to test her. And then they come in and test you and they say, oh, she's fine. And even as a teacher, I cannot tell you, Tristan, how many students I have had where I'm like, something is not like it should be here. And this kid needs some accommodations. And yes, I can give the accommodations. But when that student leaves my classroom without that piece of paper, without that diagnosis, without that testing from the school, they don't get those accommodations the next year, no matter what I say. And how do I know? Because it's happened. It's happened.
Mhm.
And this is exactly what happened with you going into high school. Your eighth grade team of teachers, and I'm just going to name them out right now because they were some of the most phenomenal, and two of them are no longer with us. Brad Simon, Pam Andrews, Kathleen Mackey, and Carrie. Oh, what was Carrie's last name? Mendel, Carrie Mendel. All four of them were very focused on the accommodations that I said, this is what they did in fifth grade, and it really worked for her. And we went over them and they were like, okay, no problem. Made a world of difference. Did it cure the fact that you had sunflower syndrome, which we didn't even know you had? No, it didn't. But did it make you have a successful school year? 100%. So
And I will say too that I've been out of school for quite a while. I mean, I'm 33, coming up on 34, I guess, but um, I don't remember a whole lot of my teachers from school. I remember Mrs. Smith, and I remember my eighth grade teachers the most. And then there are a couple of crazy ones, but those were all the best teachers. And so, of course, they're always, I know teachers don't always know the impact they have on kids, but those, I will always remember them, and I will always be grateful for the way that they treated me, the way that they made me feel. They made me feel noticed, and they made me feel loved and normal, and I will always carry that.
you're going to make me cry.
I'm gonna make myself cry.
So, um, I still have the list of accommodations. And we took this with us to high school, and just things took a downward turn, and it was awful in high school. But
And I will
I
take this list. I will take this list with me to my new neurologist appointment, and I'm actually going to have you on the phone, Mom, because I am so determined for for the doctor to listen to me.
oh, he's gonna listen. He's or she, maybe it's a she.
I'm gonna
Um,
lock the door and be like, "Listen."
make some threats on the
Exactly.
Zoom
Yep.
call. Yeah. Um, well, so I would think if I were an educator listening to this right now, I'd be like, what were the accommodations? Because it's hard for educators to make all the accommodations, especially we get some crazy stuff you wouldn't even believe. And I feel you people out there, but because I am that parent and she knows that I have it, I still had the list of accommodations. Some people keep the first lock of hair. I keep the accommodations from the 504. Um, so the first one, I don't think that this is something that would still be applicable today, Tristan, but it speaks to your point. The first accommodation was to notice you.
Mhm.
It was just to notice you. And we even had written in there, when teachers make contact with a hello in the hall or before class and some sort of how you doing during class, you didn't space out, you stayed engaged because you
And
felt
that
seen.
helps. Yeah, and that helps so much because with this condition, because it is odd behavior, you're not like the other kids. You definitely can get bullied. It's possible, and it definitely happened to me. And that really made me feel isolated and like it was harder to connect with people who didn't understand what I was going through. So, the other kids that had ticks, I, was like, well, I don't think I have the same thing they do because I would get to a point when I would be doing this so much that I would like feel myself start like jerking a little
Twitching.
bit. Yeah, which, happens
Yeah.
also before I do have a tonic-clonic seizure. And then, yeah, and I would, we'd call it spacing out now, but yeah, I was having a seizure, and then it did make it hard, and I wanted to be noticed, but not in the way that I was being noticed. I didn't want to be picked on. Yeah.
Well, and noticed, you were noticed by some teachers that you didn't want to be noticed by too, again,
Yeah.
in high school. So, and middle school too. I mean, those were some tough years. Okay.
They
So the
made
first one, go ahead.
most people have horrible memories of middle school, but I will say my 8th grade, if I could go back in time and I had to do middle school, I would do 8th grade over again. That's it. I don't want any more, but they were really great. I
That's
think I'm the
nice.
only person in the world who can say that. I
I
would
don't
go
know.
back
That
to
team of
middle school.
teachers was pretty special.
They
Okay,
were.
so the first one was notice you. The second accommodation was to keep punishments to a minimum. And, it's not like you were the type of kid that got a lot of disciplinary action. We wouldn't even call it a punishment now.
Yeah,
But
I was quiet, shy, good one.
but I will tell you, you were getting consequences pretty frequently, and it was for
Mhm.
missing assignments, for not having a book or a paper or a pencil or something in the classroom. And so again, those teachers took those consequences away, and it was just a given. Tristan, do you have your worksheet? Okay, go get it out of your locker. It wasn't because the school that you were in gave detentions for that kind of thing. And it just felt like before that year you were in detention all the time.
Mhm.
For forgetting classroom materials was usually what it was.
A
Um,
pencil. I would get a detention every time I forgot a pencil,
yeah.
and sometimes I would. There were a few times where I was given the option to get a pencil from my locker that came along with a detention. So there were times where I would be like, I don't want a detention, so I guess I'm going to do my work in class without a pencil and hope for the best. Hope it's not anything we have to actually write that day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's another point with this kind of condition, your memory is affected. Again, that attention and memory. Also, anxiety
Mhm.
is closely, most people who have this condition have a fairly high level of anxiety that can even lead to panic attacks. So,
Mhm.
okay, so notice her, keep those disciplinary actions to a minimum. Um, hello, contact parents when assignments aren't being turned in. And that didn't happen either until 8th grade, and then I think it didn't happen again till your junior year when I threatened to sue the school district. So, can you even believe
I
they
didn't know about
hired
that.
me? I can't believe I was able to get a job in this district. Anyway, um, but yeah, I was like, how do I know? And this was before, like now we have lots of different softwares. Every school district uses one where parents can check in on their kids. But this was back in the day when we didn't have that. And so I had no way of knowing. It's like, oh, she failed. I'm like, "Uh, how did she fail? I was never contacted. Oh, she didn't turn any assignment in all year. Um, so at another accommodation was strategic seating. And I actually changed the wording on this because we didn't call it strategic seating back then, but that's what it is. Which was if you have somebody who maybe has trouble paying attention, having them in the back of the room, not a best fit for them. So that was it. We just wanted you to have, seating where, yeah. And once we got into high school, 3 weeks before finals, we would coordinate testing options if necessary. So this got added after your seizures because one of your seizures you had, and you probably don't even remember it, and you had to go to school the next day and take a test. And
I don't
or
remember that at all.
well, because that's what happened. We realized that after a tonic-clonic seizure, a couple of days would go by where your memory was sketchy at best. It took everything a while to reboot. So, and then encouragement and kindness make Tristan feel more comfortable because we had some teachers that were just frustrated that they had to make any accommodations for you, and they were not nice. They just were not nice. They wouldn't speak to you. I don't, anyway, it's not important to go into all of it, but it was tough. Outdoor activities, such as ones that could happen in PE, could be a problem. And you needed an alternative indoor activity for that day only. Fortunately, you only had to do like 1 year of PE, thank goodness. But and this one was a hard one to get them to agree to excuse you so you could use the restroom whenever you needed to. Because the anxiety and all of that gave you some bathroom issues as well.
It
And
did.
then
And that
in
was
high school, I'm sorry, go ahead.
and that wasn't even just in school. I mean, it's not, they think people probably think that, oh, this kid just wants to be able to leave class whenever, parents are being overprotective. But no, that carried outside of the classroom, because I remember when we would go out to eat at a restaurant, when I'm pretty much in public, I would get sick to my stomach. I would take like 2 bites for my meal, and then I would have to go to the bathroom because I felt so sick, and I wouldn't eat for the rest of the time just because my anxiety was so high. So, yeah.
That is true. That is
So
true.
it's not that unreasonable. I didn't abuse
No,
that
none
request.
of these were unreasonable. And then the final one is to allow you to get materials that you need from your locker. So I going over this list for a couple reasons. Anybody who has a kiddo going through anything like this, there's some ideas for you that might be helpful. But also for teachers to hear this was not unreasonable. The teacher technically didn't have to do anything except email me if you weren't turning assignments in. So that's what I'm saying. I hear about all of this going in for this, you know, we need to be doing this lesson in all these ways, and this is what helps kids best. No. If a kid tells you or a family tells you that there is an issue like this, these are the things that are helpful. These are the things that make kids continue to come to school and not stop going to school. And I do think the climate has gotten better over the years, and I don't think, you know, we need a label for listening to the needs of learners. Most educators are doing this. So how does this relate to burnout, which is what the podcast is about? Well, personally, I think being asked to make the same lesson 100 different ways to reach all learners is stressful, whatever you want to label it. Making educators feel like they're responsible for every academic acquisition a person can obtain, also super stressful. But I would like to remind everyone it was a teacher that realized something was not okay with Tristan. And we need more Mrs. Smiths and that 8th grade team. Funny enough, all of them did their own thing in the classroom, especially Mr. Simon.
Mr. Simon.
Yes.
Actually, so in my math class, which was right next to Mr. Simon's class, Miss Mackey would have to close the door and make sure his door was closed too, and we could still hear him yelling because he would just randomly yell. And it wasn't like he was mad. He would just randomly, everyone would be like writing or taking a test, and he would randomly burst into song, or he would just start playing music and have like, he would like at the top of his lungs. Imagine a teacher as you're coming in, he's just sitting like this, just having a great time. And yep, you could hear him pretty much anywhere on the floor of that building. And it was
Yep.
wonderful. We all loved it as middle school kids.
But that's the thing. They all did their own thing in the classroom. And that thing that they were doing was primarily getting to know the kids and teaching the content.
Yeah.
That was it. That was the two things. They didn't have a name for that back then, and it's almost non-existent today. So, Tristan, do you have any advice for anyone out there who has sunflower syndrome?
Well, my advice would be, it's kind of difficult because I think that I just have a hunch that there are a lot of people who have sunflower syndrome that don't know it. So I would think my advice would be, if someone hears this podcast, if someone finds out about it, if they think that, anyone who's been diagnosed with a tic that has to do with, hand wiping like that, or, like drawn to the sun, that sort of thing. Psychologists, psychiatrists, they're all great and they're really good at their jobs, but I definitely think that if I had seen a neurologist as a kid, I think it would have been caught a little early. And I do hope that that this, spreading awareness. So now that I know that this is a thing, I've been telling everybody about it because I will say, hey, we're going outside. I'm gonna wear a hat because I don't do the hand waving part anymore, but I will flutter my eyes, and it happens a lot in the sun. And I will say, I am still listening to you. It's gonna look like I'm rolling my eyes at you and I'm fluttering stuff, but it's just a type of seizure. So I would say definitely best advice would be to advocate for yourself. Keep pushing, keep looking for answers until something feels right. Can I share a
Absolutely.
story? Okay. So one of the things that I was thinking about that I think is related to how I feel about this is I think it was last year or the year before when my sister and I were going out to get our nails done for one of our birthdays. I don't remember who, but so I knew what I wanted. I had a picture of it. I had gotten my nails done like this before. I wanted them to be like a mirror finish, which is exactly how it sounds. It's just a silvery finish on your nails. It's reflective. That's it. So, and I can't actually do this myself, but like I know the steps and everything, but I can never get my right hand to look great because my left hand's so shaky. I'm like, I need a professional. So I went there and I showed the guy the picture and I was like, can you do this? And he said, yeah. Oh yeah, I can do that. So I know the materials that other salons have used. I know the materials that I have. And when this guy started pulling stuff out, I'm like, that does not look right. But in my mind, I'm like, okay, he's the professional. Maybe he has some other technique. So he started doing my nails, and I was like, this does not look right. And I didn't want to tell. I felt really bad because I don't want to be that person that's like, I'm going to tell you how to do your job, you know? But I kind of had to because I am having my nails done and they look nothing like the picture, even though he said he could do that. He was not doing that. And so I stopped him and I was like, um, do you think that maybe we could try this other thing instead? Maybe this would look closer to the picture. And I showed him again and he was like, oh, well, this is the closest I can get, which made me mad because I'm like, okay, well, 2 minutes ago you were confident that you could do this, make it look like the picture. So he kept going and I just had this feeling where I was like, it was really bothering me. I'm like, he's not listening to me. I'm explaining what I want, and if he would just listen to me, I could tell him how to do it, but he wasn't taking me seriously. So he got to the very last finger and he was like, I was thinking maybe he was going to do something crazy at the end and make it all perfect. But whenever he got to the very last finger and he said, all right, we're almost done, that's when I was like, okay, stop. I just pulled my hands away and I was like, okay, hold on a second, because I'm about to pay a good chunk of money for this. So I told him, I don't think this is the right way to do it. I don't want to be mean and tell you how to do things, but can we please try it my way? And so I told him what I had used and what other salons had used, and he said, oh, well, that's not going to work. I'm like, okay, well, it has worked. So, I'm like, can we please just try? I will still pay for the nails, even if they turn out horribly, which they were already there. So you can only go up, right? So, so he begrudgingly started over for me, and now I was, the problem client. But yeah, so I walked him through it, and the whole time he argued with me. The whole time when I said, okay, now you put this coat on, and he's like, well, we can't do that. Because he had to put a special powder on, and he's like, well, no, you can't dry the nail first because the powder's not going to stick. And every single time, every step, he fought me, and every single time I was like, okay, but can we please try it? Can we please just please listen to me? Please try it. And so at this point, all of the other people in the salon are kind of looking over like, oh, this lady is crazy, like what a Karen. But yeah, so whenever he started to see on that first finger where he was completing the process, whenever I kept telling him, just keep going, and then it started to get that mirror finish like I had shown him and look like the picture, then he stopped and he looked at it and he was like, well, nail techs don't know everything. We're still learning new things all the time. And I was like, oh my God, you could have learned this from the very beginning, if you had just, but it was interesting to me because even though I showed him the picture, even though I said, this is what I want, this is what I've had in the past, in his mind, he was like, okay, I'm going to do this because this is what I know. And I feel like that's very similar to my experience with doctors. So I have a really hard time getting them to listen to me when in their mind, I think that it's like, okay, she's telling me these things. I know what this is. So I'm going to give her this diagnosis. And it doesn't matter. I mean, I really have to push for a doctor to listen to me beyond that point, because there's a delicate balance between, advocating for yourself and, if you speak up too much, then a doctor, might write you off as a hypochondriac or something, or someone who spends too much time on Google, WebMD, all that kind of stuff. But if you don't speak up enough, then a doctor's not going to know what to do. So, and you're not going to get the right treatment. So I would say it's better to over advocate for yourself and ask the questions, keep pushing until something clicks, because as soon as I got those perfect nails, I felt that relief. I was like, that's right. I was right the whole time. And that's how I feel with sunflower syndrome, to know, yes, we were right the entire time. We knew it wasn't a tick. We knew that something we go through all of these diagnoses, and none of them were quite right. And it just took that little bit of extra effort, that little bit of advocating to figure out that, yeah, we finally found it. We finally found the answers, and it's a wonderful feeling.
It really is. And to your point, I would say everything you just said can also be true for educators. Sometimes we don't
Yeah.
know what's best, and sometimes families do have to step up and we have to listen. So, our intent for this podcast was to raise awareness for sunflower syndrome. In today's show notes, there will be multiple resources if you want to learn more about sunflower syndrome. Tristan, thank you for coming on my podcast and sharing your experience.
Well, thank you for having me.
I wish I knew.
Today's episode was produced and edited by me. The theme music is by Otis McDonald featuring Joni Inez. If you know someone who might enjoy these conversations, please share the podcast episodes as much and as often as you can. It's as simple as copying the link you use to access today's episode and sending it in a message or sharing it on social media. I'm a small, independent operation, and your shares broaden our audience. Perhaps you or someone you know will be inspired to talk about teacher burnout. If you would like to get your voice on my podcast, contact me via the link on my webpage, taught.buzzsprout.com. Coach, speaker, and author Rashid Ogunlaru said, "It may take many voices for people to hear the same message." Join me in being one of the many voices rising up to get the message out around educator burnout. This is Melissa LaFleur. Thank you for listening to Taught, the podcast.
I wish I knew.